Hello everyone. I was actually wondering if your parents also read some fairy tales to you when you were young. If they did that, then you'll probably all know the Brothers Grimm. Well, today I'm going to talk about the Brothers Grimm and how they are linked to language. So to start, it's very important to know how language developed in earlier years. Well, there were two German professors who did some research. The German professors were two brothers with the name Grimm. We know them as the Brothers Grimm. They did some research into the relationship between similar words of different languages. Now on the next picture, you're going to see the Brothers Grimm. Before we go on, it's always nice to know who the Brothers Grimm are. We always say the Brothers Grimm, but they also have first names. Their first names are Jacob and Willem, and they were born in the 18th century in Frankfurt in Germany. They both studied law, but after the death of their mother, they started working as librarians. Jacob and Willem both shared the same passion for German folklore. Now, because the brothers had a passion for German folklore, they wanted to do something with it. They started a first mission. During their first mission, they started to investigate how words can change their sounds over time. And to investigate this, they collected some fairy and folk tales from their friends. In 1812, all the fairy and folk tales that the brothers collected were bundled. This was their first collection of German fairy stories, and it was also published in this year. On the next two pictures, you are going to see two examples of the German fairy stories of the Brothers Grimm. The first example is Cinderella, and the next one is Hansel and Gretel. Now, if you think about fairy tales, then you probably think of a child who is reading those fairy tales. But the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm that were published in 1812 weren't meant for children. The stories were too cruel, there were no illustrations, and on top of that, all those stories had a long introduction as well. Fortunately for Jacob and Willem, there was a great expansion of children's literature in Europe. For example, Jack and the Beanstalk was very popular. So, the brothers needed to change something about their stories. Eventually, in 1825, the brothers selected the 50 most popular tales. They refined and softened them, and they republished them in a cheaper and smaller edition, also known as the Kleine Ausgabe. The smaller and cheaper edition was an enormous success, and eventually that edition was established as classic children's literature. Now, while the brothers were collecting all those fairy and folk tales, they had time to do some research as well. They were able to investigate phonetic shifts in the German language. They found out that all the vowel shifts were linked to a common root. Their research also showed how consonants of different languages were related to each other. Now, all those discoveries of the German language led them to formulate the Grimm's Law. This was one of the earliest and most important linguistic laws. Their work, the Grimm's Law, was also seen as the first methodology to give linguistics a sound basis. Now, because their research was such a success, the brothers began a monumental project in 1838. They wanted to make a German dictionary, known as the Deutsche Wörterbuch. That dictionary consisted of information about the history and the usage of every German word. But it actually took a very long time before the brothers' project was finished. The brothers both died at the end of the 19th century without finishing their dictionary. Eventually, in 1961, that Deutsche Wörterbuch was completed by an army of academics. Okay, so now we know that Jacob and Willem were very important for the developing of language in earlier years. Now, today there are lots of modern linguists who are also doing research in different kinds of languages. They found that today there are more than 6,000 languages worldwide. Those modern linguists don't think that all these languages originated just in one place. They found that all those languages can be traced back to about 10 main language families. The most important and the largest family is the Proto-Indo-European language, also known as PIE. But what exactly is a PIE, or Proto-Indo-European language? Well, it's a language that was spoken about 5,000 years ago in Russia. At that time, tribes were still migrating. When tribes from Russia migrated through Europe and Asia, the PIE was split into a number of dialects, and these dialects developed in time into separate Roman languages, for example, French, Spanish, and so on. Now, to end my presentation, I want to show you an example that shows us that all those proto-languages were split into thousands more. Now, if you look at the floor of the General Assembly of the United Nations, then you see hundreds of people who all have their own voice and who are talking in hundreds of different tongues or languages. This example actually looks a bit like a reincarnation of the Tower of Babel. So, after all the information about the link between the Brothers Grimm and language, we can say that the Brothers Grimm were very important for the developing of languages. And of course, languages are living entities and they all have their own beauty.